Greetings and welcome to Legacies of Wavryn, Lore of the Endelment. This will be chapter 36 of this reading. The battle between the sentinels and I waged on for about 30 minutes, the humans still barking their heads off, demanding us to leave. As odd as it seemed, JJ was right. These ancients couldn't really gain strength or power anymore. Even though Death and Tac had powers that darkness gave them, they didn't have any powers of their own, nor could they enhance what they were given. Even with them in their darkness forms, I was still stronger and faster in my normal state. It was both surprising and a little boring. I can't actually fight someone who couldn't increase their powers or strength. It just didn't seem fun or interesting to see if I could best them on my own. So in a way, it wasn't really a fight. It was just me dodging and blocking their attacks, while still getting a few hits in of my own into them. Another 5 minutes passed, then I swung my crystal broadsword to slam the edge into the left side of Death's head. Using my same motion after I struck, I did a roundhouse kick with my left foot into the left side of Tac's head. I tossed both ancients in the same direction, yet sent each into a separate building. I motioned to hover 40 feet above the ground as I looked down at them with disappointment. As I saw the two struggle to remove themselves from the walls, I swung my blade again, only to release it out towards Tac. The weapon spun wildly, but also broke apart, and each half went to stab into the sentinels to hold them where they were. Afterwards, I raised my right hand to aim my palm at Death, while raising my left to Tac, and charged a very powerful amount of energy into both hands. The two removed the crystal blades from each other and tossed them out into the streets below, then looked up to notice me release my energy into two bright red spheres, both twice my own size. I shot the blasts at each ancient, then just crossed my legs and arms to sit back and watch the show. Death and Tac went in a different direction to avoid the attacks, yet wherever they moved, the blasts would move with them. The faster they moved, the faster the spheres moved. They followed the two everywhere, even when they did tactical maneuvers that could make the greatest tracker lose them. When they figured they weren't going to avoid being hit, Death and Tac stopped and hovered 15 feet above the ground, where they stood next to each other with their backs to the wall of yet another building. The two blasts stopped as well, just 5 feet away from their targets, almost as if staring them down. The two sentinels looked over at each other, slightly in fear that they couldn't outrun the two blasts. They then became confident and nodded at the same time, looking back at the blasts as they braced themselves by raising their hands out, bending their knees in front of them slightly. When I saw that, I laughed out loud as I moved my head back slightly. I then went to look back down at my enemies and said, "Those two must be joking. With the amount of power I've put into those attacks, there's no way they can just simply use their bare hands to stop them. They must be delirious from too much adrenaline rush." The energy blasts hit against each other and fused into one, creating a huge sphere that was twice as big as the first two. Afterwards, we began slowly pushing towards Death and Tac, trying to crush them against the building. It took a moment, but the blast started to push them through the building, giving out immense heat and melting away what was around it, other than the sentinels. As the blast pushed itself into the building, it made a high-pitched noise and gathered more energy to itself, then exploded, blowing out the 4th, 5th, and 6th floors. Death and Tac were thrown out from the building's 5th floor, amazingly enough alive, while the 4th and 6th floor's support beams collapsed and crushed the 3 levels without toppling the whole structure. Yet when they smashed together, each and every single window cracked along the 3rd and 7th floors. I know that I could have killed several innocents doing that, but with how things were going and what was going on, collateral damage was the least of my worries. Plus, I didn't care anymore. Humans hated me and I hated them. And since they tried to kill an innocent of my race, they deserved having all of what they worked hard for be destroyed. Consider it payback. I moved my legs and arms down and said, well, that was fun and all, but I'm still into having an actual fight. I waited a few seconds for the ancients to show themselves again, but they just kept hidden. Afterwards, I raised my voice and called out, come on, you two. That couldn't have ended you guys so easily. I was just getting warmed up. The second I said that, the sentinels vanished over to my sides, Tack at my right, and Death at my left. They quickly kicked me in my stomach, surprisingly stunning me for a bit, making me spit up some blood. They then jolted back as Tack raised his right hand at me, while Death raised his left, and both shot rapid bursts of dark energy at me, trying to blow away my body piece by piece into nothing. However, they stopped and found that it wasn't working. My body was still intact, and all the blasts did was burn bits of my clothing away, which also rejuvenated after the smoke from their attacks cleared. I stood myself up and gave a smile as I chuckled, then looked over at Death and asked, having fun? Tack lowered his right hand, angry as he asked, why don't we just use the Dark Tails? Don't be stupid, Takai. Death calmly replied as he lowered his left hand. You know we can't do that. Powers of gods can't defeat those who also have them. He's too powerful. Like hell he is. I trained him. He's weak, which means I know I can take him. Death glanced over at his ally, then looked back at me and said, then do so, Takai. Tack looked over at Death, confused, while the man continued, that is, if you believe you can kill him, all by yourself. I won't stop you. However, after you choose to do so, I won't step in to help you till either he dies or you do. Death then teleported away to watch the fight from a distance. Tack quickly looked around, trying to find his ally, but didn't know where he had gone off to. Then turned back to me and said, it's over, Emprick. I'm done playing games with you. No man of the Shero family shall live past this year while I'm around. I chuckled at that, adjusting my glasses some more, then calmly said, good luck with that. Tack grew even more angry and jolted towards me, trying to strike me with his fists, but I dodged each swing with ease. Once he tried getting in a few hundred hits, I started giving him some of my own every 3 seconds, striking him with either one of my fists, feet, or knees. After my fifth hit into his stomach, out of the 20 hits I gave him overall, Tack stopped trying to hit me and stepped back. He held his stomach with his left hand and looked up at me with his left eye, his right eye closed from being struck hard with one of my fists. I'm sure it was closed because I popped a blood vessel when I struck it, not to mention in a great deal of pain. I gave a smirk as I quickly kicked the left side of Tack's torso with my right foot, turning him slightly away. Just as I did that, I asked, "What's the matter?" I then spun completely around from my right to face him again and punched the left side of his face hard with my right fist. A strike completely turned him away from me, while I asked, "Done already?" I adjusted to have my right side face him, raised my right hand up to his upper torso, my palm aimed out. I then quickly charged a small amount of energy into my hand. Tack looked back at me, only to notice what I was doing, but unable to counter. As I released the energy, I said, "Surprise!" The blast blew up in Tack's face and shot him into another building about 40 feet away. I first used my right hand to adjust my glasses, then lowered it and turned to where the sentinel was thrown as I said, "Well, that was fun. What's next?" Just then, a large surge of dark energy broke out from the structure that Tack was in, and it jolted straight for me. I raised my right hand against it and created a dark gray sphere barrier, shielding myself completely from the blast. 2 seconds passed, and the surge wore off, where I lowered my hand and canceled out the barrier around me. I saw Tack, both his palms held together at the bases of them and aimed up at me, panting from the massive loss of energy he used. However, It wasn't long before he lowered them and took a step back with his right foot to brace himself. He leaned forward to lash out all 9 of his foxtails at me, which only got about an inch away from hitting me. I changed into Zaec, just for fun, and had my tails form the barriers to each strike. When he noticed I blocked his assault, he vanished and reappeared just at my left side to punch my face. I wasn't able to block it, nor did I think it would have done anything. Amazingly, I was wrong. The force of his fist sent me down into an office building, either into the 7th or 8th floor. Once I hit the floor, I quickly jumped up onto my feet with a backwards hand flip, then stood myself up as I raised my left hand to my face where I had been hit and barked, "Damn, that hurt." "Of course it hurt," Shadow said. "He punched you. It's supposed to hurt. Moron." "Shut up, Shadow," Light barked. "You can't win, Endelment," Tack shouted. "Just because you have the powers of a loom doesn't mean you can best me." I lowered my hand to reach for Rakar as I quietly said, "Don't matter. I've got something better." I looked up at the Sentinel as I channeled my energy with my darkest emotions and continued, "And you won't like it." Along with going into my abyss state, Rakar changed into its large bow blade form, removing Shadow's soul from my own through my hand into its hilt. I held the weapon backhanded, raising the blade behind me and across my back to have the tip reaching past my right shoulder, and then grinned at my foe with insanity raging through my mind, laughing for a moment as I waited for him to try and strike me again. Tack seemed confused when he saw one of my newest transformations, but was uncaring to it as he raised and pulled back his right hand. At the same time, he gathered a large amount of dark energy into it for an attack, then swung his hand forward to aim at me as he shot the surge. It grew to be 3 times bigger than him all around, while he shouted, "Die!" When the attack neared, I raised my left arm up to swing the sword downwards to my right side and struck the blast with the blade itself. My motion cancelled the surge and absorbed the remaining dark energy into Rakar. Then I twisted it around while swinging it upwards and back over to my left side, using the absorbed energy to shoot out a large pitch-black key slash attack. Sentinel vanished from where he was to dodge the attack, but only barely, then reappeared right back where he was after it passed and looked down at me in fright, amazed at what I had just done. While I continued to stare up at the ancient with my smile, I moved Rakar to have the blade aimed up behind my back again and said, "Damn, almost had him." "You would have," Shadow said through Rakar, "if you had actually aimed at the man." I motioned to aim Rakar down and stabbed the blade half a foot into the floor as I said, "Shut up!" I then called back Shadow's soul, where Rakar changed into its simple dual blade katana form, with the chain wrapping around my left forearm. I flew up to hover at the same height as Tack, being about 20 feet away, we faced one another. As I was quivering from seeing my dark state, Tack said, "So, you've surpassed darkness." "Better," I said. I then flipped Rakar around to hold the hilt so that the blades were forward and continued, "But you won't be around to see it." Tack readied himself, knowing he couldn't run away with his energy nearly depleted. However, standing against me wasn't going to help either. I raised Rakar at my right side and moved to grip the hilt with both hands, tilting the blades to have the edges aimed out from my right and slightly upward. In my position, I let silence fill the air for a few seconds, thinking it would be enough to give the ancient time to pray before his sentence. Afterwards, I released a bit of my own soul's energy out to the tips of the blades to force myself forward, easily causing me to teleport. In doing so, I stabbed the dual blades all the way through Tack's heart to have the handguard pressed against his chest, giving a dark gaze into the Sentinel's eyes. Though Tack knew he was struck, he looked at me with a light smile on his face as his blood started to slowly pour from his mouth and said, You finally figured it out then. The teleportation technique.
Yeah, but in a way, I've always known.
I then moved my right hand back as I held it level with my face, charged for one last blast, and said,
It's over.
I quickly twisted my left hand around, holding Ricard backhanded and pulling it back, leaving just the tips of the blades inside the sentinel as I swung my right hand towards him. In my motion, I had positioned myself to have part of Ricard held under my left arm and my right hand next to my left shoulder as I aimed my palm at my foe. I released a powerful constant flow of my own energy from my right hand that spread out over the man's entire body, while I yelled,
Obliterate!
After a few seconds, I stopped the flow of energy and lowered both of my arms, having completely destroyed the sentinel. I also went to hold Ricard backhanded again, having the dual blades up behind my back, while I said,
I was getting bored fighting you.
Very impressive, Death said. Turned around to see the next ancient hovering in the air about 20 feet away from me, with his arms crossed over his chest and a cocky smile on his face. In his position, Death continued, Not only are you able to teleport, you can use the obliteration technique with ease, something not everyone can do. On top of that, you've managed to gain a power beyond simple darkness. Quite astounding.
You're lucky that I still can't use Shatter on you myself,
I viciously said. Yes, the infamous Shatter technique. It is said to kill any living thing in an instant, even at a distance. Whereas the obliteration technique must have a clear shot in order for it to work properly. More up close and personal. Quite an arsenal of ancient techniques you've got, Endelment.
Why don't you just shut up so I can end your worthless existence?
Tisk tisk, Death said as he closed his eyes and shook his head slightly. Don't you have any manners? He then opened his eyes to me and continued, A true warrior never jumps into battle without the proper information about his target, nor without giving his opponent a fair duel.
Well, seeing as I already know all of the things you just said and everything about you, my knowledge is pretty good. And since you were the only one left to face me, I guess that makes it a pretty even and fair match. So shut the fuck up.
Death sighed as he lowered his arms and tightened his fists, becoming angry as he viciously said, Being ignorant and rude will get you nowhere, Endelment. And furthermore, no, you don't know me, because you didn't know that I could do this. The sentinel quickly turned his right hand at his side to aim his palm at Ricard. Then somehow Ricard changed back into its battered hilt form as it slipped out of my hand and into his. Once Death grabbed Ricard, he swung it out from his right side as it changed back into its dual blade form. I can wield Ricard and Enzar just as well, Death said, along with changing it into its true form without using any of my own energy.
Okay,
I said, unconcerned. Apparently, Death was an idiot and knew nothing about Ricard, nor about it having a second form. With that, I just smiled at the ancient and asked,
You do realize that sword is going to be useless against me, right?
Oh, is that so? Death raised his right arm to aim the tips of the blades at my heart, which I didn't quite get because I couldn't sense anything, being it mortal or godly. He then lowered it back down as he raised his left hand to be about a foot away from his chest, with his middle finger and thumb readying for a snap. I waited for a moment, then he snapped his fingers as he swung his left hand out from his side. I heard a loud ear-piercing sound for about 2 seconds. Then my body was quickly ripped apart and drained of most of its energy and strength. Death's attack went on for about 5 seconds, with me screaming in pain. Then it stopped just as quickly as it came. I was forced out of my abyss form and silently fell to the cold pavement below. I had gained several cuts all around my body that felt as if they could never heal, some reaching deep into my bones, and others just went deep enough to pull the skin apart. As I fell to the ground, Death lowered his left arm as he watched me and said, "My personal technique, Death's Embrace. A gift from me to you, mortal." I struck the ground face first, which broke my glasses. Then my body bounced to roll over onto my backside. With as much pain I was going through, though, I wasn't able to fix my shades and put them away at the time. Death laughed for a moment, then he called out, "What's the matter, Endelment? Finished already? You acted so tough before, but now look at you. You're nothing." My wounds didn't heal completely, but enough to allow me to use small portions of my body again. However, I just laid there in my great amount of pain and wondered how I didn't see that coming. An ancient technique. Figures. Death floated down to where I was and stood about 40 feet away and said, "I've seen dogs with a more vicious bite than you, with even louder barks." He laughed again, then continued, "Look at you. Can't even stand to face your enemy after just one simple attack. How embarrassing." Just then, Bunny quickly flew down and knelt over my left side to try and help me up, while she called out to me to see if I was okay. The others didn't interfere, mainly because they knew if they did, they would be struck down. Yet my daughter ignored the danger and came to my rescue anyways. Death just laughed once more, thinking that he had won the fight. However, Bunny slowly stood up and turned to him with a very vicious expression. The sentinel quickly looked over at her, confused, then gave a big, insane smile as he sarcastically said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I hurt your poor little daddy? My bad." "Shut up, you bastard," Bunny barked. While struggling to get myself up, I saw Death look at Bunny with a blank stare and said, "This time, you will die, slave." Somehow, with whatever Death did to me, my body wasn't regenerating like it should, and the pain that I felt wasn't going away, nor was I even able to ignore it. Though the attack had halted me only for a bit, it was still hard for me to move. Yet even in my state, I wasn't about to lose. I had never lost a fight. Never. I struggled to move myself to kneel down on my left knee and brace myself up with my right leg. Then tried to raise my left hand up to grab Bunny's right arm as I painfully said, "Bunny, please, leave." I had just barely touched her wrist before she jerked it away from me, continuing to stare down Death as she called the cassetic crystal that I had used before into her right hand. Bunny changed the two crystals back into one whole piece, then moved to stand guard in front of me. In her stance, Bunny said, "I won't stand by and watch Papa suffer because of you." "Bunny!" Wolf called out, while Fox held her back from entering the battleground. "What are you doing? Get back here, damn it! I told you to stay put!" She barked at Fox to let her go, even though Fox didn't comply. Then she turned back at Bunny and yelled, "This is Zaec's fight, not yours! You don't know what you're up against!" "She's right, little girl," Death said as his tails raised and curled a bit over his body. "This isn't your fight, so get lost." While I was knelt down in pain, trying to stand up and move Bunny away from here, my daughter began slowly walking towards the ancient as she said, "I'm not backing down. I might not be as strong as Papa, but I can at least halt you long enough to let him gain his strength back." Idiot. After a few steps, Bunny jolted towards Death with all her might, while she pulled the crystal back. Amazingly enough, the cassetic crystal in her hand quickly changed into a 3-foot-long double-edged sword with rivets that cut across the blade every 2 inches. Bunny moved her hand to swing the blade down at Death, but unfortunately missed. The sentinel jolted back, in surprise at what the Alicans had done, dodging her attack. He tried to swing at her head with Ricard, yet she leaned back to dodge his attack and moved to try and stab at him as she motioned her right side a little closer. Once again, Death jolted back to avoid the attack. However, when Bunny lunged forward, the blade she had created broke apart at each rivet, yet still connected by a small chain that was placed throughout the center of the blade. The very tip of the chain blade stabbed through Death's stomach as the second piece struck and latched inside, which Bunny used to quickly pull him back towards her with a strong yank to her right side. Just as the sentinel was pulled towards my daughter, Death motioned to stab with Rakar as he ripped out the chain blade from his stomach with his left hand. Thankfully, Bunny missed this by simply leaning back as she motioned to stand behind the man when he passed by. At the same time, she was able to get her blade to form back into one as she motioned her hand to hold the sword backhanded, while stabbing her foe through the back of his torso. She used her right foot to trip Death and slam him into the ground, where the ancient accidentally released Rakar from his grasp. It was tossed far out in the street, sliding until it hit up against the edge of the sidewalk. As Bunny pinned Death down, she jerked herself to face Death's tail and ripped out her sword, then swung from her right to slice off all 9 tails with one sway. With that, she broke Death away from his darkness form, where she stabbed the sword back into his torso. She broke the chain blade apart again as she jumped back about 4 feet, waiting for him to stand back up. Death stood up and readied himself against my daughter, acting as if he was unscathed, but then noticed the chain blade still stuck in him. Bunny whipped her right arm, yanking the blade to pull her opponent away from me. Then she tore it out and kicked him farther away. She then jolted back to stand near me, whipping the weapon to have it connect back into one whole piece, moving to hold it down at her right side. Standing himself up again, slowly healing from the last attack, Death said, "Bitch, I'm gonna knock you out of this realm." With that, the castetic crystal in Bunny's right hand started to have bits of her aura in a lightning form strike around it as she grew angrier. The sword then formed into a large katana that still had rivets along the blade. Death glanced down at the sword, then looked back up at my daughter and said, "No matter what power you hold within your hands, you won't be able to beat me. You'll die here along with your father, and I can guarantee that it will be a painful death." "Bring it then," Bunny said. "It's too bad that you're wrong." "We'll see." In her arrogant and mindless rage, Bunny swung out her blade and had it break out to swing itself around Death. But before she could pull it back to latch it onto him, the Sentinel quickly formed back into his darkness state and used one of his tails to get the blade wrapped around it at his left side. He then grabbed the chain blade with his left hand and clenched it hard enough to break it, shattering the entire castetic crystal into dust within both his grasp and Bunny's. Ignoring the odds, my daughter went in for one last strike. She jolted towards her opponent and jumped into the air, pulling back her right fist to motion for a punch. However, Death used one of his tails to halt her and struck it into her torso. He snapped his right hand fingers to call Rakar back to him. Then the ancient quickly charged a massive amount of energy into the blades as he stared into Bunny's eyes with a fierce gaze. When Bunny was struck with Death's one tail, Wolf began panicking, trying to pull away from Fox to stop her daughter. But Fox was afraid for Wolf's life, so she didn't want her to interfere. I couldn't stop either one of them because of my condition, which made me feel even worse to just see Bunny fight against Death, knowing that she wasn't going to win. Blight was just being ignorant and was observing the fight as if it was simple entertainment, cheering on either Bunny or me to kill Death. Yet what was really strange was that Serena was watching the fight calmly, silently, as if waiting for something to happen. Nanya was held back by her so that she could see what would happen next. Holding my daughter up, Death said, "I've had enough of you, Elikins. Now die." The Sentinel not only ripped his tail away, He swung Ricard towards my daughter to fire one massive key slash that was 5 times bigger than normal. Once I saw Death swing Ricard out, I saw the key slash blow Bunny's body away and continued onward into space, where it dissipated into nothing. Bunny was gone. When I sensed my daughter's body and spirit energy disappear from me, I lost all sense of control. I was filled with nothing but absolute hatred. My body ignored the pain given and felt as though it could withstand any amount of force in my way. The power of my energy and strength started to rise rapidly and almost endlessly, nearly overflowing my body and burning it up from the inside. Just as my body began to ignore its pain, I stared over at where Bunny had disappeared with a surprised expression. I couldn't believe that my beloved daughter was killed right in front of me. I stood up and grew very angry as I bared my fangs at Death, while clenching my fists so tight that my claws pierced into the palm of my hands, forcing my blood to drip from them. When I stood, Death turned to face me to continue the fight, but then quickly sensed that my power was rising, and he became a bit concerned. As my powers grew, in nothing but hatred and rage, I viciously said, "You bastard! I'm going to make you pay." I braced my stance by moving my left foot back, while positioning my arms out from my sides and raising my fists slightly, then moved my head back to stare up at the sky. With all my might, I screamed, "I'm going to make you suffer!" With a long, loud roar, after my very angry and very demanding speech, my true dark gray and blood red mixed energy aura appeared around me and flared wildly, along with several dark gray and blood red lightning strips sparking around my body, all spreading out at about 2 feet. As my roar continued, my aura quickly gathered into me. Then in a second, my roar stopped as my aura burst out. The shockwaves that my aura created blew out and shattered anything glass-like within a mile radius and stopped the storm clouds above from raining, but the lightning and thunder continued on. Shockwave also made a constant aura dome within the area that it blew out from, causing everything to have a slight tint of dark gray and blood red to its look. At the same time, my body changed a bit in both appearance and might. My muscles grew about half as big as they were before, but my true strength increased by twice as much. Strangely though, my eyes and hair didn't change, but they shined slightly more. My energy grew so powerful that it even had a weight of its own, crushing anything that couldn't brace itself up well enough to just stand in my path, which slammed Death onto his left knee as Ricard slipped out of his right hand. However, my allies were unaffected by my energy dome. I gave another loud roar for about 5 seconds, trying to deal with the pain of change within my body. Once I stopped, I lowered my hands and moved my head to look over at Death, where I saw the ancient use all of his strength in his struggle to look up at me as well. Now finally fearing my presence, Death said, It's true. The god amongst mortals. The fierce entity within ancients. The Endelment. His power is unimaginable. Absolutely fearsome." With my immense hateful gaze, I yelled, "This time, I won't hold back. It's over for you, Quellen. Your life is now forfeit." Death was barely able to stand on his own, struggling with all his might against my aura pressure, while pulling out a strand of his own hair with his right hand. As I saw him channel dark energy into the strand, he said, "No, I'm not going to die." He then raised his voice and yelled, "Even if you are the Endelment, even if you are a god, you won't beat me. I am an ancient, the most powerful of them all." He raised his voice more, then continued, "I vowed long ago not to let a single Shero live to rule over any piece of land. I'll kill you all." The sentinel swung his right hand out from his side and released the strand of hair that he had. It was engulfed in the dark energy used to create a black smoke that vented out and grew rapidly. The smoke flew behind him a bit and moved up a couple feet, trying to form a creature of some sort. With the creature being summoned, I just stared at the sentinel and said, "So, it was because of you. You're the corruption that plagued our worlds. The true reason why all the other ancients turned their backs on us and disappeared. That's why I was brought here. To stop you. That's the truth, isn't it? So what? I may wish for an empire that I rule, but I'm not going to abuse my powers to force others to serve my every need. Not like your family has done ever since it began its reign." The smoke stopped venting out from Death's hand as he lowered it and said, "I may not be able to kill you myself, but that doesn't mean I can't kill you by summoning a god. One that can destroy any living thing in its path." The black smoke above took its form, then burst apart and disappeared to reveal Hegu towering over Death. When the behemoth was brought forth, he let out a loud and powerful roar that was of a lion and a bear together. He then looked down at me with a fierce gaze, but I just stared up at him without any care as to his presence. Death laughed, then said, "Jijiku Shero wasn't the only one that could summon Lord Hegu to a fight. Even with your second wind, you won't be able to stand against him." I turned back to the moronic ancient and said, "Grandpa wasn't stupid either. He knew the fine art of conjuration, and that's this. A summoning is only as good as the one who called it forth. Therefore," I raised my right hand to my heart and pulled out both Shadow's and Light's soul with ease, then raised them at my head level and said, "You disgrace Hegu's glorious name and defile his true essence of power with your moronic achievement." Death became fearful as he saw what I was doing, conjuring my own god allies into battle, while he said, "No, this isn't happening. It can't be." I tossed both Shadow's soul and Light's back and used some of my own energy to form and create two bodies. Both quickly became Shadow's and Light's original massive nine-tailed fox form, with Shadow to my left and Light to my right, both crushing some of the buildings nearby just to stand in the area. My aura dome then reverted back into my body, just having my aura flaring off and sparking around me once again. When Shadow and Light were summoned, they simultaneously looked over at each other with a smirk, then looked over at Hegu and gave a very loud and fierce growl that echoed, probably even beyond my hearing. The behemoth just stared at them and growled back, as to tell them to step away, but he took a step back with his right paws. I chose Shadow and Light because I wanted nothing more than to prove Death wrong. I may have wasted my first chance, but with my new powers, I had more than enough to bring forth another conjuration on my own. I knew that Shadow and Light were no match for Hegu when they lived in the realm of gods, but as a summoning, rules change. As I said before, a summoning is only good as the one who conjured it. Therefore, there was no way Hegu could stand against Shadow and Light and even come close to being equal to them. Just as Hegu stepped back, Shadow did his sinister chuckle, then the vile fox said, "I have always wanted to do this. Defeating a legend is, how you say? Delightful," Light suggested. "Exactly." With that, both foxes jolted to pounce the behemoth, slamming him into the ground. Shadow then vanished somewhere as Light picked up Hegu by the neck with her mouth and threw him far from her left side. As the summoned gods fought amongst each other, Death and I did one last silent stare down for about 3 seconds. After that, Death grew very angry as he said, No, I'm not going to lose. No matter how much power you truly have in Endelment, you're not going to win this war. Not even this fight for that matter. I smiled and responded, well then, I guess what I'm about to do must be some kind of delusional state that you're going through. I then became very angry myself and viciously continued, because I'm about to beat the living shit out of you. We jolted towards one another and started rapidly striking each other while trying to dodge or block the other's attacks. Every now and then, we teleport in some random spot in the city as we fought, but even when Death used all 9 of his tails to fight against me, I still had the advantage. I was just wearing him out for a clear and easy shot. He wasn't going to get away. Not after what he did to my daughter. After a few minutes, the fight slowed as I struck Death in the left side of his face with my right fist. Then when he hit the ground from about a 50-foot drop, I floated down to have my feet gently touch the ground. My aura around me settled, but still sparked a bit along my figure. Death picked himself up to try and stand against me again, while he breathed heavily from our little spar. I looked over at the sentinel with a blank stare as he stood, where I said, "Your persistence is annoying. You can't best me no matter what you do. No matter how much power you think you have or can obtain. No matter what tricks you've got up your sleeves. You're still going to die." The ancient wobbled from side to side, still trying to stand against me, while I continued, "At this rate, you might as well accept it. I have the ultimate source of power, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. Like JJ said, I've already won." I raised my right hand and channeled my energy into it as I insanely smiled and said, "And to prove it, I'm going to invoke an impossibly powerful ancient technique. One not even you could have ever hoped to do in your wildest dreams." I laughed when I gathered enough energy, then raised my right hand to the sky. Nothing happened for a moment, but then I released the energy as I swung my hand down to the ground and yelled, "Let it rain!" In his idiocy, Death watched me with a confused expression at what I was doing until after I had swung my hand down. Then he looked up to try and find out what I was doing with the sky. However, when he looked up, he was struck hard with the first blast into the left side of his face. The storm clouds above didn't actually rain water. I called for a different kind of rain, one that I only read of in a historical book of special attacks, which was only known to be used by very high-powered ancients, making it impossible for others to conjure. I forced the clouds above to fire down small white blasts of energy, each the size of my fist, within a 10-foot diameter around where Death stood. Each blast slammed into the sentinel as if it were my own fists punching him, slowly one at a time. Then it grew to be more and more like rapid strikes as the blasts fell faster and harder. With crushing blows, the blasts descended from the heavens above as they grew more powerful with each attack. Within no time, they slammed Death into the ground and began grinding him into the pavement. After a few seconds, the blasts had drilled him into the dirt and buried him there. But I knew he wasn't dead. I wasn't going to let him elude me so easily. After about 10 seconds, I ended the attack and stood myself up straight, moving my head back as I laughed out loud at what I had just done. I then moved to look at where the ancient was to see him struggling to get out of the crater that I put him in, almost crawling from it. I smiled and said, "Normally that attack would have taken too much energy for me to use on one person. While at the same time, it shouldn't have been as strong as it was just now. And even after that, I still have plenty of energy to bash you with." Death stepped out of the crater and stood slightly hunched over, his left eye closed and pouring blood from the first impact of my attack. while he struggled to speak and said, "Just because you're that damn Endelment doesn't mean you have unlimited power." He then raised his fists, while also raising his voice, as he channeled some of his energy to rise and yelled, "I can still beat you!" The Sentinel roared and forced his aura to flare from his body, gathering and charging energy from within his very soul. I gave a light chuckle as I watched, then said, "Did you not hear me before? You can't win this fight, so don't even bother trying. Just give up and let me beat you senselessly for a couple more hours. You'll live longer that way." Death vanished over to me and kicked the left side of my head with his right foot, barely budging it at all. But even with that, the ancient proceeded to attack me, vanishing each time he wished to strike. After the 10th attempt, he tried rapidly attacking me, punching and kicking with all his might. Yet he still couldn't damage me. He just slightly budged me every now and then. The Sentinel started to slow down, emphasizing each word with a strike as he yelled, "Why won't you just die?" As he struck me with his final kick to the left side of my neck with his right foot, I quickly reached over for the ancient's right ankle with my left hand. While he was in the air, I gripped his ankle and I pulled him closer so I could punch him with my right fist, breaking his right knee backwards. Before Death could even touch the ground again, I yanked his right leg to pull him across me as I turned to my left. I snapped his knee back into its position, released his ankle, and punched my left fist into his stomach. The force of my punch was so great that when Death hit the ground, he bounced back up a few feet as his right side turned to me. I used that moment to kick him up in the right side of his torso with my right foot as hard as I could, spinning him quickly as he flew about 15 feet into the air and 80 yards away from me. Once more before he could hit the ground, I jolted over and drop-kicked the Sentinel in the chest with my left foot, crushing the pavement as I smashed him into it. I ground Death through the streets for a few feet. Then once we stopped, I jumped up about 25 feet to fall hard onto his stomach, pushing him deeper into the ground. After I did that twice, I jumped back about 20 feet, then jumped back again about another 10 feet and used my left hand to brace myself as I slid a bit. I stood myself up and gave a smirk as I looked down at where Death laid, while Hagu was thrown just barely over my head through one building and into another. I didn't really have a reaction to it. Just let the beast fly by without a care. Wasn't long before Shadow and Light came crashing through as well, moving to bring down Hagu through their own mixed means. Oblivious to what Shadow and Light were doing, I spoke to Death and said, "That was a lot of fun. Get up. I want to do it again." My tail wagged in excitement as I watched the ancient struggle even more to stand up. Then after a few seconds I continued, "Get up, you worthless pile of garbage. I promised that I'd make you suffer, and that's exactly what I'm gonna do." When Death mustered out the strength to stand, slightly hunched over and leaning to his right side, I saw that he was dripping blood from his mouth and from a few cuts on his forehead that were over his left eye, covering it with blood. He also had some major gashes on each of his limbs, and one that cut around his torso from his lower left side to his lower back. Death was barely able to speak, yet he still said, "No. Why? You. It's not fair. It's not fair." He then raised his right hand up to his waist from his side, his palm aimed up, as he yelled, "It's not fair! Why did they favor you?" The Sentinel used his right hand to gather dark energy in a spiraling motion, then it broke away to call back Rakar into his right hand, with the blades releasing their own dark energy in the form of smoke simmering off it. As the ancient ran towards me with the weapon ready for a stab, I just stood my ground smiling as I waited for the attack. Death raised Rakar as Serena jolted over, feeling I was in danger. where she stood against him as if to block the attack. However, as Death lunged the black and evil blades towards us, a large black and gray wolf teleported just in front of Serena and I and held its snout up at the weapon. A large translucent dark gray wall with a strange yet powerful incantation marking on it that was bright orange appeared and stopped the blades from striking any of us. Then, as quickly as the wall appeared, it vanished, with it also bursting out a shockwave that tossed both Ricard and Death back. The wolf stood up as it stared at the sentinel and said, "Bad time to intervene, my lady." The wolf then turned to look back from its left side and up at my wife as it continued, "You could have been killed." Serena looked down at the wolf. She placed her hands on her hips and said, "I'm not about to lose my husband because of his idiocy, Baraku." Baraku was a black and gray Hiroga wolf, mostly black, with a little white diamond symbol on his forehead just slightly above and in between his eyes. His left eye color was charcoal gray, and his right eye shined a very bright yellow-orange, which he never let anyone see unless he used his greatest of powers. The Hiroga wore 2-inch width metal bracelets on each of his ankles, and a sparkling silver collar around his neck that was studded with inch-big diamonds. He had a gash on his right ear at the outer side center of it, and a gash on his left ear near the outer base of it. He also had battle scars just about all over his body, but they were hard to see from how well he maintained his fur. There was also a scar on his right eyelid that cut across vertically through the center, and horizontally just at where his eyelid closed. After Baraku looked back, Death quickly picked himself up and braced himself onto his hands and knees. While doing so, the ancient yelled, "It's not fair! They favored him!" He then raised himself onto his knees as he bent his head back while he shouted, "They favored a Shero!" Death roared as he stumbled to run over to us, desperate to fight back in any way he could. However, broken from his darkness form, the sentinel just barely reached Baraku before the Hiroga turned back and glared at the man with his right eye. The wolf picked Death up off the ground about 35 feet high with his powers, then quickly slammed the man back down, hard enough to crack the pavement, possibly break all of the ancient's bones. Once I saw that, I grew angry and said, "Both of you get back. He's mine to deal with, not yours." Serena quickly turned to me and yelled, "So what the hell were you thinking, huh? You know that sword is dangerous. What the hell possessed you to let him strike you with it? He could have killed you." I stared down at the sentinel again, him simply struggling to breathe, and I said, "He can't kill me, no matter what he does. And besides, what makes you think I'd let him touch me with that inferior weapon?" I raised my left hand up to gently push Serena away and said, "Stand aside." I then lowered my hand, yet raised my right slightly out from my side with my palm up and said, "This will end it. It's all over for you now." Baraku moved over with Serena as Death struggled just to brace himself up on his hands and knees again. The sentinel looked up at me, barely able to keep his right eye open, as I charged about 20% of my own energy into the ground directly below him. I sensed that Death was trying his best to control the last bits of his energy to use Dark Vanish, but was unable to. How unfortunate. I smiled, knowing what the man was trying to do, and said, "Don't bother. You can't dodge this." I quickly raised my right hand to my head level and forced the energy I gathered to strike upwards at Death with great force, yet slowly burning and breaking him apart into nothing. After about 5 seconds, I clenched my right hand into a tight fist to break away the blast and have it disappear, leaving nothing of my enemy behind. I lowered my right fist down to my side as I moved my head back slightly to laugh out loud, while the clouds once again began to pour rain down. My laughter grew louder and louder every time I took in a breath, nearly echoing across the city as it stood in fear from what it saw and sensed. Another few seconds passed, and I charged my energy inside me, causing my aura to flare off my body again, while swinging my fists up to cross them in front of my face. When I swung my arms back down, I looked down at the ground where I had used my attack and yelled, "Even after all that, I still reign supreme in power. I can destroy this entire planet and still have enough energy for a good fight. I can destroy it all. Anything and everything that stands in my way." I then raised my voice as I glanced back up at the clouds above and shouted, "I am the most powerful god within all realms. No one can stop me." Sir Rick said. "Problem." "Don't worry," Wardrick said. "It's just a phase. He'll get over it." Blight flew over to hover above my left shoulder and yelled, "My lord, you have gone mad, completely insane and drunk with power and wild for destruction. You are, in fact, crazy. Now I must ask." He then flew up a bit and calmly asked, "You feel good?" As my aura flared and sparked wildly around my body, I relaxed slightly and looked forward and violently said, "I feel great." Just then, Hegu broke through another building that was behind me and started grinding across the pavement on his back towards my position. Once he reached me, I quickly spun around once and roundhouse kicked him up into the air with my right foot. At the same time I struck the beast, I said, "Better than ever." Hegu flew up to about 100 feet, and I jumped up after him while I continued, "Stronger, faster, and above all." When I reached Hegu, I raised my right fist and pulled it back as far as I could, then swung down at the behemoth's stomach and struck him just as I said, "More powerful." Hegu struck the ground, shaking the nearby structures as the air felt it was trying to force me back for a moment. Gazing down at Hegu, lying there defeated, I felt as though I needed to send a message. Not only to those in the mortal realm, but to those that were in the god realm as well. And what better way to send a message than to use a very painful and gruesome attack? Death's embrace. The behemoth rolled onto his feet, only to look up and see me charge a large amount of energy into my right hand and swing it across my body. The blast flew silently and unseen into Hegu's body. Then I quickly swung my right arm back. I snapped my fingers. The behemoth tried for one last attack, charging his energy into his mouth for a powerful surge of energy, but he was thwarted by mine and simply fell onto his stomach after it was done, whining and whimpering in pain. "Well now," I said with a smile as my aura stopped flaring, "that was quite entertaining. But my fight is over with, so there's no need for you to be here any longer." Both Shadow and Light walked over to my sides and stood facing Hegu as I continued, "Now then, I want you to send a message to all of those little pricks in the realm of gods. I, the Endelment, will cleanse this realm of all evil, and I will not fall from anyone in this realm or in their realm." "Wow," Blight said. "Brutal." All three gods disappeared, but Shadow's and Light's soul fused back into my own. At the same time, I calmed down and changed back into my normal self. Blight moved to my right shoulder and asked, "Can you change like that anytime you want, my lord?" I turned to look over my right shoulder at Serena, who was talking with Baraku about him staying with us for a while, and replied, "I don't know. It seemed to only happen when I got really emotional." Just then, Serena looked up at me as Baraku went to go talk with Nanye. My wife gave me a slightly angry expression, then it changed to a saddened one as she continued to stare up at me. Oddly enough, I had a few visions pass through my head. It was like deja vu. I don't recall ever seeing them before, but I swear that it had happened anyways. With that, I said, "That's odd." "What? That you're a bum?" I slowly turned my head to aim my sights at Blight, where he just said, "Hey, don't make me put my size 125 up your butt." Not really feeling up to punching the ball, I just shook my head as I turned away with a quiet sigh. For my beloved baby girl, this is for you. I'm sorry for what happened, and I pray that we may meet again. Hopefully, in the realm of Loom. To once again live in peace. Neither I nor Wolf will ever forget you, both in our minds and in our hearts. You are my beautiful little girl, Bunny Shero. I'm sorry I could not save you. This concludes the reading of Chapter 36. Thank you all for watching and listening. If you like what you've seen and heard, there will be a link to my physical works in the description below. Other than that, stay safe, take care, and we'll see you again next week reading Chapter 37.